Long before electric lights, engines, cameras, and written histories that could be copied in seconds, there was a place beside the Nile where human beings began building upward into the sky. The land was warm during the day and quiet at night, and beyond the green fields of the river lay a vast desert of pale stone. Here, more than 4,000 years ago, people began creating monuments whose size would remain difficult to comprehend even after entire civilizations had risen and disappeared. The pyramids have often been described as mysteries, but perhaps their deepest mystery is not that they were built. It is that an ancient society was able to organize enough people, materials, mathematics, food, transport, religion, and time to make such enormous structures possible. Tonight, we will travel slowly through that ancient landscape and consider the pyramids not as impossible objects, but as the enormous result of thousands of ordinary decisions. We will begin before the Great Pyramid, when Egyptian builders were still learning how to transform the traditional tomb into something much larger. We will then move through the reigns of Djoser, Snefru, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, following the gradual development of pyramid architecture. Along the way, we will consider the stones themselves, the workers who moved them, the rivers and harbors that carried them, the mathematics used to align the buildings, and the religious ideas that gave the monuments their meaning. And when we reach the Great Pyramid, we will pause quietly beside its enormous stones and ask what exactly remains mysterious. To understand the pyramids, it helps to begin with the river. The Nile was more than a source of water. It was the central organizing feature of Egyptian life. Every year, its waters spread across the narrow valley and deposited fertile soil. Villages, farms, temples, roads, and administrative centers developed along its banks. To the west was the desert, a place associated with the setting sun, and therefore with death and the afterlife. The eastern bank, where the sun rose, was more strongly associated with life. This geography became part of Egyptian thought. A royal tomb placed on the western side of the river was therefore not simply a practical burial location. It occupied a landscape already filled with symbolic meaning. Before the pyramid became the dominant royal monument, Egyptian kings were generally buried beneath rectangular structures known today as mastabas. These tombs were substantial buildings with sloping sides and flat roofs, constructed above underground burial chambers. They could contain rooms for offerings, rituals, storage, and the continuing relationship between the dead ruler and the living world. The idea was not simply to hide a body underground. The tomb was part of a larger system designed to preserve the king's existence after death. Food, objects, images, names, and rituals all played a role. Over time, Egyptian architects experimented with increasingly ambitious forms, and one of the most important experiments took place at Saqqara during the reign of King Djoser. Djoser's monument was different from anything that had come before it. His funerary complex at Saqqara included a massive enclosure surrounded by ceremonial structures, courtyards, underground rooms, and the stepped pyramid that rose at its center. The architect traditionally associated with the complex was Imhotep, a figure who would later be remembered as a great sage. The monument began with forms related to earlier mastabas and was transformed through successive stages into a structure of stacked levels. It was not yet the smooth-sided pyramid that most people picture today, but it represented a profound change. Stone architecture had been used on an extraordinary scale, and a royal tomb had become a monument that seemed to rise toward the heavens. The step pyramid also reminds us that the pyramids were not isolated geometric objects. They were parts of much larger ceremonial landscapes. The pyramid itself was only one component. Temples, courtyards, causeways, storage areas, chapels, walls, and subsidiary structures surrounded it. The complex created a permanent stage for rituals associated with the dead king. In this sense, the pyramid was less like a modern monument standing alone in a public square, and more like the central element of a carefully planned sacred institution. Thousands of years later, much of the surrounding architecture would disappear, leaving only the most durable stone structures. This can make the pyramids seem more isolated and mysterious than they originally were. After Djoser, Egyptian builders continued experimenting. The most important developments occurred during the reign of Snefru in the 4th dynasty. Snefru was associated with several major pyramid projects, including the pyramid at Meidum and 2 pyramids at Dahshur. These monuments reveal something important about ancient construction. The final form was not necessarily obvious from the beginning. Builders changed designs, modified angles, altered structural approaches, and learned from earlier difficulties. The famous bent pyramid at Dahshur is especially revealing. Its lower portion rises at a relatively steep angle before changing to a gentler angle near the top. Rather than viewing this as a failure, we can see it as evidence of experimentation. The red pyramid at Dahshur represents another stage in that process. Its sides rise at a consistent, relatively shallow angle, producing the form that would become familiar as the true pyramid. The progression from mastaba to step pyramid, then through experimental structures, and finally toward the smooth-sided pyramid, is one of the clearest ways to understand Egyptian engineering. There was no single moment when someone suddenly discovered the complete solution. Instead, generations of builders accumulated experience. They observed cracks, weight, foundations, angles, stone behavior, transport problems, and construction schedules. Knowledge was carried forward through people, workshops, scribes, and institutions. The Great Pyramid emerged from this long tradition rather than appearing without precedent. Now let us travel north toward Giza, where the most famous phase of pyramid construction took place. The plateau overlooks the ancient Nile floodplain, and in the 4th dynasty, it became the setting for 3 royal pyramid complexes. The first and largest belonged to Khufu, the second to Khafre, and the third to Menkaure. Today they are usually grouped together as the pyramids of Giza, but they were not constructed as a single project. Each king had his own reign, his own funerary complex, his own administration, and his own architectural program. Their close arrangement nevertheless created a landscape in which the monuments appeared to form a family of enormous stone mountains overlooking the river valley. Khufu became king around the middle of the 26th century BCE, and under his rule, the Great Pyramid was constructed. The original pyramid was significantly taller than the structure we see today because its outer casing of polished limestone has largely disappeared. Its 4 sides were carefully oriented toward the cardinal directions, and its enormous base covered a remarkable area. Most of the stone used in the core was local limestone, while finer limestone from Tura was transported for casing and other architectural elements. Granite from Aswan, hundreds of kilometers to the south, was used in important internal areas. The monument therefore represents not one quarry or one workshop, but a coordinated network extending across much of Egypt. From a distance, the Great Pyramid appears almost impossibly simple. 4 sloping sides meet at a point. There are no towers, statues, balconies, or complicated external decorations. Yet this simplicity is deceptive. The pyramid required a carefully prepared foundation, an enormous supply of stone, organized transportation, skilled cutting, controlled placement, and a sequence of internal construction decisions. The apparent simplicity of the finished form conceals the complexity of the process. This is one reason the pyramid continues to fascinate engineers and archaeologists. The ancient builders did not need modern machinery to create a sophisticated structure. They needed organization, experience, and time. For many centuries, one of the most persistent stories about the pyramids imagined huge armies of slaves being driven toward the monuments by overseers. Modern archaeological evidence provides a more complicated picture. Excavations south of the Sphinx have uncovered a substantial settlement associated with the construction of the Giza monuments. Archaeologists found evidence of workers, craftsmen, administrators, food preparation, workshops, and other activities. The settlement demonstrates that pyramid construction required a permanent institutional infrastructure. It does not mean every worker lived the same life, nor does it eliminate forced labor from ancient Egypt, but it strongly challenges the simple image of an enormous slave army doing nothing except dragging stones. The settlement also allows us to think about the workers as people rather than as anonymous figures. Someone had to bake bread, someone had to prepare meat, someone repaired tools, someone recorded deliveries, someone managed boats, someone organized supplies, someone shaped timber, someone cared for animals, someone treated injuries, someone supervised teams, someone made pottery. The pyramid was therefore the visible result of a much larger invisible world. The stones may survive for thousands of years, but the ordinary routines that made their movement possible disappeared almost completely. Archaeology recovers fragments of that world through animal bones, pottery, tools, seal impressions, plant remains, and the arrangement of buildings. One of the most valuable discoveries connected with Khufu's pyramid comes not from Giza itself, but from the ancient harbor site of Wadi el-Jarf on the Red Sea. There, archaeologists discovered papyri dating to the reign of Khufu. Among them were records associated with an official named Murr. His diary describes journeys involving teams transporting limestone from the Chura quarries toward the Great Pyramid at Giza. The records are extraordinarily valuable because they provide something rare in ancient history: a contemporary administrative glimpse into the work behind the monument. Instead of relying entirely on later stories or modern calculations, we can hear something of the ancient bureaucracy itself. Murr's records are not a complete construction manual. They do not tell us every detail of how the pyramid was raised. They do not reveal one secret ramp design or explain every engineering problem. What they do show is a system of organized transport. Limestone was quarried, loaded, moved by water, unloaded, and delivered according to administrative schedules. This is important because the Nile provided something the desert could not: a relatively efficient transportation corridor. Boats could carry heavy materials far more effectively than people could drag them across long distances. The pyramid therefore depended not only on stoneworkers and laborers, but also on sailors, boat builders, administrators, quarry workers, and the seasonal rhythms of the river. The river was particularly important during the annual inundation. When the Nile rose, waterways could extend closer to areas that were otherwise separated from the main channel. Archaeological research around Giza has revealed evidence for ancient waterways and harbor infrastructure associated with the pyramid projects. This does not mean that every stone was carried directly to the foot of the pyramid. Transport was a sequence. A block might be quarried, moved to a loading area, placed on a boat, carried downstream, unloaded, and then transferred again. Every stage required planning. The great achievement was therefore not merely lifting stone. It was maintaining a continuous supply chain over years of construction. The question of how stones were raised remains one of the most discussed subjects in pyramid studies. Ancient Egyptians clearly used ramps and other methods of moving heavy materials, but archaeologists do not possess a single universally accepted reconstruction that explains every stage of the Great Pyramid. Several possibilities have been proposed, including straight ramps, zigzagging ramps, ramps that followed parts of the pyramid, internal arrangements, and combinations of techniques. It is quite possible that the builders changed their methods as the pyramid became taller. The lower courses presented one kind of problem, while the upper levels presented another. Ancient engineers were not required to use one technique from beginning to end. The wooden sledge was an especially useful tool. A heavy stone block could be placed upon it and pulled by a coordinated group. Egyptian art depicts teams moving large objects in this way. Experimental studies have also demonstrated that moistening sand in front of a sledge can reduce the resistance encountered during pulling. It is a small observation, but it illustrates a broader principle. The builders did not need one spectacular invention. They could combine many modest improvements. A strong rope, a smooth path, a carefully prepared sledge, a manageable block size, a large coordinated team, and a well-organized schedule could together accomplish something that would seem impossible to an individual. The stones themselves also varied considerably. Many of the Great Pyramid's core blocks were relatively local limestone, and their size was not uniform. Some were modest enough for coordinated teams to move, while others were much larger. Granite used in the king's chamber and nearby structures came from Aswan, where ancient quarrying left evidence of enormous stoneworking operations. Transporting granite from the south required long-distance river travel. The presence of such material at Giza, therefore, tells us something about the reach of the Egyptian state. A pyramid was a local monument built from a national network. The farther a material had to travel, the more administrative coordination was required. There is another question that quietly sits beneath the entire pyramid mystery. Why build a pyramid at all? The answer is connected to Egyptian ideas about kingship and the afterlife. The king was not simply a political ruler. He occupied a sacred position at the center of Egyptian society. His death required a transition, not an ending. The funerary complex provided a setting in which rituals could continue, offerings could be presented, and the deceased king could remain connected with divine forces. The pyramid's rising shape also carried symbolic associations. Egyptian religious thought connected the king with the sun and with the journey between earthly existence and the divine realm. The pyramid may also be understood in relation to the ancient Egyptian concept of the primeval mound. In creation traditions, the first land emerged from the primordial waters. A pyramid rising from the desert could therefore evoke an image of emergence, stability, and renewal. Its geometric form was not merely decorative. It belonged to a religious landscape in which the king's continued existence was connected with cosmic order. The monument was intended to endure, and its endurance mattered. The Egyptians were not simply trying to make something large. They were trying to create something capable of participating in eternity. Stone was chosen precisely because it could preserve a structure long after individual human lives had ended. This helps explain why the pyramid's orientation mattered. The builders paid extraordinary attention to the relationship between the monument and the surrounding landscape. The sides of the Great Pyramid are aligned remarkably closely with the cardinal directions. Ancient Egyptian surveyors did not possess modern compasses or satellite positioning, but they had practical astronomical knowledge and careful observational techniques. The stars provided fixed points in the sky. Shadows provided a way to establish directions. Simple measuring instruments could be used repeatedly to maintain lines and angles. Precision did not require modern electronics. It required patience, repeated observation, and an administrative culture capable of preserving standards. The Great Pyramid's orientation is sometimes presented as if it proves the Egyptians possessed knowledge beyond their historical period. There is no need to make such a leap. Human beings can achieve impressive precision with simple tools when the task is repeated carefully. A right angle can be established with a rope divided into measured sections. Straight lines can be extended using sighting techniques. Horizontal surfaces can be checked using water. Verticality can be monitored with a plumb line. None of these tools is sophisticated by modern standards. Yet combined with skilled workers and careful procedures, they become powerful. The mystery is therefore less about lost magic and more about the extraordinary effectiveness of simple methods applied consistently. As the pyramid rose, the geometry became increasingly demanding. A small error near the foundation could become much larger many levels above it. The builders therefore had to maintain the position of the pyramid's edges and corners throughout construction. Stone courses had to remain stable, surfaces had to be prepared, and the overall slope had to be maintained. The pyramid's apparent simplicity again hides the work involved. A modern observer sees four smooth faces. An ancient worker saw thousands of individual decisions. Each block had to occupy a place within a larger system. Each layer contributed to the final geometry. The completed pyramid was the accumulated result of countless small acts of measurement. Inside the Great Pyramid, the story becomes even quieter. The monument contains passages and chambers that are arranged within the enormous body of stone. The King's Chamber, constructed largely from granite, is reached through a complex internal arrangement that includes the Grand Gallery. Above the King's Chamber are a series of spaces often called relieving chambers. These were constructed with massive granite elements and appear to have helped distribute the immense weight above the chamber. The precision required to bring such heavy material into these internal structures is one of the remarkable aspects of the monument. The builders were not simply making a mountain. They were placing carefully selected spaces inside it. The Grand Gallery itself is a remarkable space. It is long, tall, narrow, and carefully constructed. Its walls rise through a series of corbelled layers, gradually narrowing above the passage. The space creates an impression very different from the massive exterior. Outside, the pyramid appears solid and almost featureless. Inside, the builders created passages that guide movement through darkness and stone. We should remember, however, that much of the interior was never designed for modern visitors. These were functional and ceremonial spaces connected to the king's burial and the monument's religious purpose. Their meaning belonged to a world in which architecture, ritual, astronomy, and kingship were deeply intertwined. The king's chamber is comparatively austere. Its walls are made from enormous granite blocks, and the room contains a large stone sarcophagus. There are no surviving inscriptions covering its walls. This absence has encouraged centuries of speculation. Yet the lack of decoration does not necessarily imply that something has been hidden from us. Many parts of the pyramid have been damaged, entered, altered, or robbed over thousands of years. We cannot assume that everything originally present survived. The chamber's simplicity may also have been intentional. Ancient Egyptian royal architecture often placed meaning in proportions, materials, orientation, ritual, and restricted access, rather than relying entirely on written decoration. The pyramid also contains narrow shafts that have generated enormous interest. Some extend from the internal chambers toward the exterior. Their precise functions remain debated, and various explanations have been proposed, including ventilation, symbolic pathways, or astronomical associations. It is important to distinguish what is established from what remains uncertain. Archaeologists can measure the shafts, document their directions, and compare them with Egyptian architectural traditions. But interpreting their original purpose is more difficult. Ancient builders did not leave us an instruction manual. A structure can preserve its physical form while losing the explanation that once accompanied it. That gap between surviving object and vanished intention is one of archaeology's most persistent problems. Over the centuries, the pyramid's outer casing disappeared from most of its surface. Polished limestone once covered the core, creating a smooth and brilliant exterior that would have reflected sunlight strongly. Some later buildings in Egypt reused stone from older monuments, and natural processes also affected exposed surfaces. The result is the stepped appearance we recognize today, where the underlying courses are visible. The modern pyramid is therefore not quite the same object that Khufu's people saw. Imagine approaching it in the 4th dynasty. Instead of the rough blocks visible now, you would have seen an enormous, carefully finished geometric surface extending upward in a continuous plane. The scale is difficult to appreciate from photographs. The Great Pyramid's base covers an enormous area, and its original height approached 150 meters. Yet its significance is not simply that it was tall. It was tall while being built from stone blocks, without steel frames, concrete pumps, cranes, or powered vehicles. Every increase in height multiplied the logistical difficulties. A block that could be moved relatively easily at ground level became harder to position higher up. Ramps had to be extended or modified. Materials had to be supplied continuously. Workers needed food and water. Tools needed maintenance. Survey lines had to remain accurate. The entire project had to continue year after year. This is where administration becomes as important as engineering. A pyramid project could not depend on individual effort alone. Officials had to estimate quantities, organize labor teams, distribute food, maintain transport, and record information. Seal impressions and administrative remains found around Giza provide evidence for such organization. The state had the ability to mobilize resources on a large scale. The pyramid was therefore also an expression of political structure. Its stone body represented the capacity of the Egyptian state to coordinate people across different regions. In that sense, the monument was not only a tomb, it was also an enormous demonstration of institutional power. Food was another essential part of the system. Human beings cannot build monumental architecture without being fed. Archaeological remains at the pyramid workers' settlement include large quantities of animal bones, pottery, and other evidence connected with food preparation. Bread and beer were fundamental components of the Egyptian diet, while meat could be provided in substantial quantities to organized labor groups. The diet does not prove that every worker was wealthy or comfortable, but it suggests that feeding the workforce was itself a major logistical undertaking. Behind every stone block stood a chain of people who had prepared meals, transported supplies, maintained ovens, stored grain, and managed water. The workers also needed tools. Copper was available for cutting and shaping, while harder stone tools were used for other tasks. Wooden implements, ropes, sledges, levers, baskets, and simple measuring devices formed part of the technological environment. Copper tools could wear quickly when used against hard stone, meaning that sharpening and maintenance were continuous tasks. This is easy to overlook. Modern machines are designed around replaceable parts and industrial production. Ancient construction required craftsmen who understood how materials behaved and how to restore tools after repeated use. Skill was therefore embodied in people. The knowledge was not simply stored in machines. It lived inside workshops and was passed from one generation to another. There is also evidence that labor was organized into teams. The records associated with Murr refer to groups under his supervision, and the settlement at Giza suggests a structured workforce with different responsibilities. It is tempting to imagine a single enormous crowd, but the reality was probably more orderly. Large projects are easier to manage when divided into units. One group could work at the quarry, another could handle transport, another could prepare stone, and another could build. Administrators could rotate assignments and maintain records. The pyramid, therefore, grew through coordinated systems rather than through a continuous mass of people pushing randomly against the same problem. As time passed, the pyramids changed. Khafre's pyramid at Giza was slightly smaller than Khufu's, although its position on higher ground can make it appear almost as tall. Some of its casing survives near the summit, giving us a faint impression of the smooth exterior that once covered the entire structure. Khafre's complex was also associated with the Great Sphinx, a colossal figure carved from the natural limestone bedrock. The Sphinx has a human head and a lion's body and is generally connected with Khafre's reign, although its exact history remains a subject of scholarly discussion. Like the pyramids, it belongs to a landscape where royal power, religion, and stone architecture were inseparable. Menkaure's pyramid was smaller again, but its complex contained remarkable stonework and statuary. The reduction in pyramid size should not be interpreted simply as a decline in Egyptian ability. Architectural priorities changed. During later periods, more attention was sometimes given to temple decoration, reliefs, statues, and religious spaces. The pyramid was one element within a changing funerary system. Egyptian civilization continued building pyramids for centuries, but the enormous scale associated with the Fourth Dynasty gradually became less common. This reminds us that monumentality is influenced by politics, religion, economics, and cultural preference. The largest pyramid did not establish a permanent rule that every later king needed to surpass it. During the Fifth Dynasty, pyramids continued, but royal attention increasingly turned towards solar temples and richly decorated funerary complexes. The relationship between kingship and the sun became particularly prominent. Later pyramids were generally smaller, while temples became important spaces for elaborate reliefs and rituals. This gradual change tells us something about Egyptian religion. Religious ideas were not frozen at the moment when the Great Pyramid was built. They evolved. The meanings attached to kingship, the afterlife, the sun, and gods such as Osiris changed over time. The pyramid itself remained recognizable, but its place within Egyptian thought shifted. By the end of the Fifth Dynasty, King Unas introduced an important development inside his pyramid. The walls of the burial chambers were covered with what are now called the pyramid texts. These inscriptions contain spells and religious statements intended to assist the king in the afterlife. They represent some of the earliest substantial religious texts preserved from ancient Egypt. Their appearance also changes the experience of the pyramid. Earlier monuments communicate through shape, location, architecture, and ritual. Now words themselves become part of the interior. The stone walls begin to speak, at least in a symbolic sense, carrying instructions and religious language across thousands of years. The pyramid texts also provide a useful reminder about the meaning of the word mystery. Some mysteries are created because information has been lost. Others exist because the ancient people themselves intended something to be understood only within a ritual context. We can translate words, measure buildings, analyze stone, and reconstruct transportation routes. But we cannot perfectly reconstruct the experience of being an ancient Egyptian standing inside a royal pyramid. We can approach that experience through evidence, but never completely recover it. History is therefore partly a science of limits. What we know matters, but so does recognizing what we do not know. Now, after considering the evidence, we can return to one of the oldest questions: how were the pyramids actually built? The simplest answer is that we do not know every detail. we know many parts of the process with considerable confidence. Stone was quarried. Materials were transported by land and water. Workers used sledges, ropes, tools, ramps, and levers. Surveyors established positions and orientations. Administrators organized food, labor, and materials. Skilled craftsmen shaped and fitted stone. The state coordinated the overall enterprise. What remains uncertain is the exact combination of techniques used at particular stages, especially as the Great Pyramid rose toward its highest levels. That uncertainty is not evidence of something supernatural. It is simply the normal condition of ancient history. The ramp question is particularly interesting because different ramps solve different problems. A long, straight ramp can provide a gradual slope, but would require enormous quantities of material as the pyramid grows. A wrapping or zigzagging ramp uses space differently. Other theories propose internal or partially internal arrangements. Archaeological evidence from other pyramid sites demonstrates that ramps were used in Egyptian construction, but it does not necessarily reveal the complete system employed at the Great Pyramid. It is possible that several methods were combined. A construction project lasting decades could also adapt as circumstances changed. Ancient builders did not need to follow a theoretical plan perfectly if practical experience suggested a better solution. Another popular question concerns whether the pyramids were built using advanced lost technology. There is no archaeological evidence requiring such an explanation. Ancient Egypt produced extraordinary results using technologies appropriate to its time. This does not make those technologies ordinary in the sense of being unimportant. Quite the opposite. The impressive part is how much could be accomplished with relatively simple materials when human organization reached a high level. The absence of modern machines should not be confused with an absence of engineering knowledge. Ancient societies developed their own methods suited to the materials, labor systems, and environments available to them. The same principle applies to mathematics. The builders did not need modern algebraic notation to understand proportions. Practical geometry can be developed through measurement and experience. Egyptians had systems for recording quantities, areas, and volumes. Their mathematical texts demonstrate knowledge of arithmetic and geometry sufficient for many administrative and construction problems. A pyramid requires a relationship between base, height, slope, and level. These relationships can be controlled through ropes, rods, measurements, and repeated procedures. The resulting structure may appear mathematically mysterious because modern viewers see the final precision without seeing the thousands of practical measurements that produced it. There is a quieter mystery in the pyramid's empty spaces. Modern scanning technologies have revealed previously unknown voids and structures within the Great Pyramid. These discoveries remind us that even a monument studied for centuries can still contain information that is not immediately visible from the surface. A void does not automatically mean a secret chamber filled with treasure. It may have a structural purpose, an unfinished area, or a function that remains unknown. Archaeology requires restraint. A newly detected space is a fact. Its interpretation is a hypothesis. The distinction matters because the pyramids have accumulated so many legends that every new discovery can quickly become something larger than the evidence supports. The pyramid's survival is itself remarkable. Human civilizations have changed languages, religions, borders, technologies, and political systems countless times since Khufu's reign. The Nile has continued flowing. The desert winds have continued moving sand. Cities have risen around the monuments. Tombs have been entered. Stones have been removed and reused. Yet the core of the Great Pyramid remains. This endurance was not accidental. The Egyptians intentionally chose a form capable of supporting itself through gravity, using layers of stone arranged around a broad base. The pyramid is structurally stable because its mass is concentrated low and spread across the ground. Its shape is therefore both symbolic and mechanically sensible. The ancient Egyptians also understood that architecture could shape memory. A human life is brief. A monument can last much longer. By constructing a royal tomb on such a scale, the king's name and identity could remain connected with the landscape long after his death. The pyramid was therefore a kind of physical memory system. Its chambers supported rituals, its inscriptions preserved names, and its visible form announced the presence of the king to everyone who traveled through the region. Even after the original religious system faded, the monument continued to attract attention. In this sense, the pyramid succeeded beyond its original purpose. It survived its creator's world. Thousands of years later, Greek and Roman visitors encountered these monuments as ancient wonders. By their time, the pyramids were already older than many of the civilizations that modern people associate with antiquity. The monuments accumulated stories. Some visitors understood them as royal tombs. Others speculated about their purpose, construction, or age. As centuries passed, new interpretations appeared. Medieval travelers encountered the pyramids through their own cultural traditions. Early modern explorers entered chambers and passages. Eventually, archaeology developed as a systematic discipline, bringing measurement, excavation, inscriptions, and comparative study to the problem. The mystery did not disappear. Instead, it changed from legend into research. Archaeology has gradually replaced some of the oldest myths with more interesting realities. We now know that pyramid builders lived in organized settlements. We know that materials traveled along the Nile. We know that officials kept records. We know that the monuments were parts of elaborate religious complexes. We know that pyramid construction evolved through experimentation. We know that workers possessed specialized skills. We know that ancient Egyptians could achieve remarkable precision with simple tools. And yet these discoveries have not made the pyramids less mysterious. In some ways, they have made them more human. Instead of imagining an impossible machine, we begin to see thousands of people cooperating over long periods of time. Consider for a moment what it means to coordinate a project that could outlast every person working on it. A young stoneworker might begin his labor while the pyramid was only a few meters high. Years later, he might see it towering above the plateau. His children might know the monument as something their father helped build. Administrators could plan for seasons that they themselves would never see completed. Craftsmen could teach techniques to younger workers. The project could become part of the rhythm of their lives. This is perhaps one of the quietest explanations for the pyramid's existence. Monumental architecture is possible when a society is willing to invest human effort in a future that belongs partly to people who have not yet been born. The Great Pyramid also changes our understanding of what technology means. Technology is not only machinery, it is organized knowledge applied to a practical problem. A rope is technology, a sledge is technology, a standardized measurement system is technology, a boat designed to carry stone is technology, a system for feeding thousands of workers is technology, a method for training craftsmen is technology. An administrative record is technology because it allows information to move through an institution. Seen this way, the pyramid becomes an enormous technological system. Its most impressive component may not be any single tool. It may be the coordination of many simple tools within a sophisticated social structure. The question of who actually designed the Great Pyramid is also more complicated than popular stories suggest. Egyptian tradition and archaeology give us the name Himiunu, a high official associated with Khufu's reign, whose statue survives, and who is often connected with responsibility for the project. But a monument of this scale could not have been designed by one person working alone. Surveyors, architects, foremen, quarry specialists, craftsmen, scribes, transport officials, and many others would have contributed. The phrase, the architect of the Great Pyramid, therefore simplifies a much larger institution. Ancient monumental architecture was collective knowledge expressed through coordinated labor. There is something especially peaceful about considering the pyramid from the perspective of night. During the day, its stone surface would have been intensely bright beneath the Egyptian sun. At night, the same structure would have become a dark geometric silhouette beneath a sky filled with stars. The workers would have rested. The river would have continued moving slowly through the valley. Fires would have burned in settlements. Priests would have maintained rituals. Somewhere on the plateau, unfinished stones would have waited for the next morning. The pyramid was built through ordinary days and ordinary nights. Its extraordinary appearance came from the accumulation of those ordinary moments. Perhaps this is why the pyramids have remained so powerful in human imagination. They sit at the boundary between what seems impossible and what careful organization can achieve. From a distance, they resemble mountains. Up close, they are made from individual blocks. From the outside, they appear simple. Inside, they contain carefully planned spaces. From the present, they seem impossibly ancient. Yet they were built by people who woke each morning, ate meals, sharpened tools, carried materials, recorded deliveries, solved problems, and eventually went home. Their world was very different from ours, but the basic human acts were familiar. The mystery of the pyramids, therefore, has several layers. There is the mystery of construction. Exactly how did the builders organize every stage? There is the mystery of purpose. How did religious beliefs shape the architecture? There is the mystery of society. How did the Egyptian state mobilize such resources? There is the mystery of individual experience. What did the workers think while building something that would become one of humanity's most enduring monuments? And finally, there is the mystery of survival. Why did these structures remain standing when so much else disappeared? Archaeology can approach each question, but none is exhausted by a single answer. Over the centuries, the pyramids became older and older even as people continued to live around them. When later Egyptian kings built their own monuments, Khufu's pyramid was already an ancient landmark. When Egyptian languages changed, the stones remained. When political power moved between cities, the monuments remained. When new religions entered Egypt, the monuments remained. When scholars began excavating them with modern instruments, the same stones remained. The pyramid became almost a fixed point against which human history could be measured. A dynasty could be brief. A kingdom could collapse. A language could disappear. The pyramid could still be there beneath the sun. And perhaps the most useful lesson is that the pyramids do not require us to imagine a lost civilization with impossible powers. The civilization that built them was impressive enough without such inventions. Ancient Egypt had engineers, craftsmen, administrators, sailors, farmers, priests, mathematicians, builders, and laborers. It had institutions capable of storing knowledge and distributing resources. It had a river that connected distant regions. It had quarries rich in stone. It had religious traditions that gave monumental construction a profound purpose. And it had generations of experience. These ingredients, combined over time, were enough to produce the monuments we still struggle to comprehend. Now let us return once more to the Great Pyramid itself. Imagine standing far away from it, where the details of the individual stones disappear and the structure becomes a single shape. The desert is quiet. The Nile lies beyond the fields. The sky stretches above the plateau. The pyramid rises without movement. It does not explain itself. It does not tell us every method used to construct it. It does not reveal every thought of the people who worked there. It simply remains. Perhaps that is part of its mystery. The monument has survived long enough to become detached from the world that created it. Yet traces of that world still remain inside the stones and beneath the surrounding ground. If we listen carefully, the pyramid story becomes less about impossible secrets and more about time. A stone block may have been quarried in the morning, transported during the day, positioned later, and then left in place for more than 4,000 years. A worker may have spent only part of his life on the project, while the monument continued long after his death. A scribe could record a delivery on a fragile piece of papyrus, never imagining that the record might one day help people thousands of years later understand how the work was organized. A simple administrative note could cross the enormous distance of time and remind us that behind the monument were human beings doing practical work. There are still unanswered questions. Archaeologists continue to study the Giza plateau. New technologies allow researchers to look inside structures without dismantling them. Excavations continue to reveal traces of settlements, waterways, workshops, and administrative systems. Every new discovery adds another small piece to the larger picture. Sometimes the new evidence confirms what scholars already suspected. Sometimes it forces them to reconsider an old interpretation. This is how archaeology progresses. It does not begin with certainty and end with certainty. It moves gradually, allowing evidence to narrow the range of possibilities. The pyramids remain mysterious partly because the evidence is incomplete, but also because ancient civilization was complex enough that no single explanation can contain it. Perhaps one day another papyrus will be found. Perhaps another settlement will reveal a forgotten detail about labor organization. Perhaps a new survey will clarify how a particular passage was constructed. Perhaps an old theory will quietly disappear and be replaced by a better one. That is not a failure of our understanding. It is the natural process of learning about a distant past. The pyramids have already taught us that knowledge can survive in unexpected forms. A piece of pottery, a scar in a quarry wall, a clay seal, an animal bone, a fragment of papyrus, or the alignment of two stones can become evidence. The past rarely speaks loudly. More often, it whispers. And so the mystery of the pyramids becomes quieter as we approach it. They were not built by people who understood everything. They were built by people who solved problems one at a time. They learned from earlier monuments. They adjusted their methods. They organized materials. They measured the landscape. They moved stone. They fed workers. They recorded information. They performed rituals. They repaired tools. They continued. The final pyramid gives no impression of this gradual process. It looks complete, silent, and timeless. But beneath that silence is the accumulated labor of an entire society. When we look at the pyramids today, it is easy to think about their size first. But perhaps their most remarkable quality is not size, it is continuity. The same basic human needs that shaped the pyramid builders' lives remain with us. We still organize, we still build, we still preserve memories, we still search for meaning in the face of death, we still look upward at structures that seem larger than ourselves. The ancient Egyptians expressed these concerns through stone, religion, kingship, and landscape. We express them differently, but the questions remain surprisingly familiar. As night settles over Giza once more, the pyramid becomes a silhouette. The stones that were once bright beneath the Egyptian sun grow dark. The paths around the monument become quiet. The workers' settlement is gone, the boats have disappeared, and the voices of scribes and craftsmen have faded. Yet the monument remains in the landscape, not because it was built by beings unlike us, but because people very much like us devoted years of effort to something they believed should endure. Their names may be forgotten, their individual stories may never be recovered, but their work still occupies the horizon. The pyramids, therefore, do not need to reveal a final secret before they become meaningful. Their mystery is already contained in the distance between one human lifetime and 4,000 years. A person could touch the stone, look at the sky, hear the Nile, and know that the monument had been there for generations. Today, we can stand in almost the same landscape and experience the reverse. We arrive after thousands of years and find the stones still waiting. That continuity is perhaps the closest thing to a message the pyramids give us. Time changes almost everything, yet some human efforts can survive long enough to become part of the landscape itself. So, as we leave the plateau, there is no need to solve every remaining question tonight. The exact arrangement of every ramp can wait. The final purpose of every passage can remain uncertain. Future archaeologists may discover things we cannot yet imagine. For now, it is enough to remember what the evidence already tells us. The pyramids were built by an organized ancient civilization using stone, water, wood, rope, mathematics, skilled labor, administration, and time. They were part of a religious and political system that understood kingship and death in ways very different from our own. And they were created by ordinary human beings capable of extraordinary cooperation. The Nile continues to move through Egypt as it has for countless generations. The desert remains beside it. The pyramids remain on the western horizon. Somewhere beneath the sand and stone, there are still fragments of the world that built them. Tools, pottery, foundations, broken objects, traces of food, pieces of writing, and perhaps discoveries that have not yet been made. Archaeology waits patiently. The stones do not hurry. The past does not disappear all at once. It simply becomes quieter, and every generation listens in its own way. And now, perhaps, the most useful way to end our journey is simply to let the pyramid become what it has always been, a monument standing quietly beneath the sky. No voices, no machinery, no crowds, only stone, desert, river, and stars. The people who built it are gone, but the result of their work remains. Their world has become history, yet their ability to organize, imagine, measure, and build still speaks through the monument. The mystery is not that human beings could create such a structure. The mystery is that human beings, living such long ago, could care enough about the future to begin. Thank you for spending this quiet hour among the stones of ancient Egypt. If you are listening as the night becomes still, you can let the questions remain unanswered for now. The pyramids have waited for thousands of years, and they are in no hurry to reveal everything. Let the desert grow quiet in your imagination. Let the Nile move slowly beneath the stars. Let the enormous stones become distant shapes against the darkness. And somewhere beyond the last thought of the ancient world, allow the story to fade gently into silence. May you rest peacefully, and may your night be calm.